I think, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer, the Banco, the Grupo Cajamar, for his kind invitation to be here, to make a presentation that I'm very much going to focus on Spain. You already learned a lot about Almeria and the land around. I will focus on Spain primarily, but let me tell you something. After watching the video and also this presentation, I realized why I am so pleased to be here. I mean, what we just watched and listened is a very powerful statement of an institution which is very, very proud of its history and its contribution to the economic development in the footprint. And I'm convinced that probably most of you, all of you, have been very much represented by this video, because you could also tell us similar stories about how you contribute in your countries to the economic development and the prosperity of your economies. So this is the reason why I'm particularly pleased to be here today. But as I said, I'm going to focus on three issues, and then afterwards, if you wish, we can exchange our views on maybe what you are more interested in, which is about banking regulation, banking supervision, digital euro, whatever you want. I can answer your concerns very much. But I am going to focus today on three issues. First is I'm going to give you a flash about the Spanish economy and the global environment surrounding it. Then I will focus on the banking system. And then finally, I will say a number of things and present you a number of figures about the cooperative sector. I mean, this is a year, this is the timeline. I don't know, you can watch it, but this is the timeline of 2025. This is a year that if we take in isolation some of the events we have been confronted with, you would conclude that the potential to be really disturbing and really be a challenge for the economy, for the global economy, for the European economy, for all involved in economic activities, it's certain. But in spite of all these, I would say, unprecedented events of geopolitical nature, of real changes in terms of the direction of policies worldwide, you would conclude with me that if something has to be stressed in the global economy, is resilient. In spite of all of this, the economy has been pretty resilient. These are the projections for the global economy they are for the US and also for the Euro area, three areas. Prior to 1 year ago. 1 year ago, these were growth. Relative to their potential of their economies, they were okay, fine. We started revising downwards these projections, particularly early this year, in the event of a number of, let's say, initiatives from the US new administration that looked very challenging for the global economy. But now we are coming back, these are the latest projections, to the projections 1 year ago. All the potential downsides have not been materializing, and we are actually, in the case of the Euro area, actually later this week, we have a Governing Council meeting on Wednesday and Thursday. There will be new projections for the EU economy, and President Lagarde already mentioned last week, I think, that they might be revised upwards again. So this would imply that the growth in the Euro area is even higher than expected 1 year ago, in spite of all these, let's say, anomalies and disturbing events. So resilient at the global level and the European level is a word we need to really remember all the time, and probably think about what are the sources of resilience, but probably this is for another talk. One of the reasons of this resilience is that in spite of expectations, these are projections on the growth of the global trade by the World Trade Organization. Again, this is 1 year ago. This is what we thought just in the spring, and this is the projection now for 2025. You see that we are coming back and all the expected deterioration of trade worldwide has not materialized. And this is one of the sources of this resilience. And probably we should think about why this is happening. And then let me focus then on the Spanish economy. This was just a flash, maybe for further thought. On the Spanish economy, I would like to take, for those who are not very familiar with a long-term perspective. This is a chart of the gap of growth of Spain relative to the European Union since the start of the monetary union in 1999. And I have identified a number of periods. This is a period over the first 10 years of the monetary union. And what you can see is that consistently during this period, the Spanish economy was growing much above the European average. But that was a growth very much fueled by the very acute decline in real rates when we joined the monetary union that gave rise to a bubble, a credit bubble, and a model of growth that proved very much unsustainable, very much demand-driven, and also associated with accumulation of debt in various sectors of the economy. What happened was, and this is the second period, that there was a financial crisis, a major corrections. So during the subsequent 5 years, between 1990, 9, 1920, 13, 14, basically the second period that you can see here, half of the growth differential over the first 10 years was vanished and was corrected. So there was a major adjustment process in the Spanish economy during that period that continued in subsequent years. So we managed, basically, the Spanish economy managed basically to deleverage very much, we will see later, but also I think to be a major change in the way the firms operated, much more entrepreneurship, and a major shift from domestic demand-oriented economy to much more export-led. And this is one of the keys of the success of the Spanish economy subsequently. And we started again over the next 5 years growing above the European average. Then the COVID came, the COVID hit the Spanish economy far more than other countries because of the far more specialization in certain sectors that were particularly affected by the measures that were taken in order to isolate us from the virus. And then after that, and this is the more recent period, Spanish economy is actually now growing. I mean, the latest figure will be for 2025 at unprecedented levels. All this chart need to be, all the figures in this chart need to be seen in relative terms to the European average, the European Union average. We are now at at the record level in terms of growth differential. And to me, this is very much resulting of the continuation of policies over a protracted period oriented to correct previous imbalances. And actually now this growth is taking place with very much lower levels of debt, with current account surpluses, and even with productivity gains that, although still relative terms to Europe, is still not very large, are much larger than in the past. So I think that that's good news, but we are central bankers, so we need to always indicate the risk. I will come back to this. And here there are a number of indications of reasons why this growth differential is now particularly large. In a way, the post-COVID environment is much more favorable to us than in the past. The first has to do with tourist services. I mean, while the COVID hit us particularly strongly, afterwards, what we have seen in Europe is a major shift in preferences of consumers towards leisure, to consumer services against other type of goods and services, and Spain is favored by this change in pattern that looks to be very persistent over time. And actually, this is happening with a seasonal pattern in terms of more consumption of tourist services in months of the year that in the past were not so conducive to service sectors, and it's implying that the stock of capital in terms of hotels, restaurants, infrastructure that in the past were not so much efficiently used, now it is basically there's productivity gains associated with this shift, this seasonal change in the service sector. This is one of the reasons why the Spanish economy is growing strongly. But something that probably is not so much known is that the strongest sector now in Spain in absolute and relative terms has to do with the non-service sector. And this to me has very much to do also with a new post-COVID development, which is that we have learned that we can work remotely and provide services in a cross-border manner much better than we thought. And Spain is a country that has very good digital infrastructure, one of the best in Europe, and at the same time has a number of factors that is conducive to attracting foreign workers that are producing services from abroad, consultancy, software, etc. This is one of the factors, sectors in which we are more dynamic and probably is not so well known, apart from the more traditional tourist sector. The third has to do with energy. Prior to the COVID or the Ukraine war, the cost of electricity for Spanish firms were more or less on average a little above our competitors. Now, after COVID, it's 30% below, and this very much to do with our focus on renewable energies that also has to do in part with long-term policies oriented to support these kind of energies. And we have a comparative advantage, no doubt. It was mentioned before because of the sun, but also because of the wind and the availability of land for setting up solar plants and wind plants. And there are two factors that tend to support all these other factors. One is the fact that Spain is attracting foreign workers in sectors that really are, there is a scarcity in the world labor market. Let's say skilled workers and the two ends of the spectrum, skilled workers and non-skilled workers. So now that there is a general mood in the European societies, let's say, less favorable to migration, Spain retains migration policies which are very much targeted, and we are benefited from that in the sense that bottlenecks in labor markets that we are also experiencing are far less acute than in other parts of the world or in Europe, and this is, let's say, labor factor is not as constraining factor as in other countries in the Spanish case. And I think the location is also helpful. I mean, we are in a new geopolitical world in Europe. Being in the south, being in the west tends to be an advantage, and this is also perceived in terms of investments and strategic decisions by firms. This helps explain why we are consistently growing well above the European average over the last 5 years. And in principle, if you look at projections over the next 2 or 3 years, this seems to be that it will remain to be the case. However, there are a number of challenges of the Spanish economy that need to be recalled. One is debt, public debt, not private, public debt remains relatively high, a little above 1%, 100% of GDP. It's declining, okay, but the medium-term framework for public adjustment in public finances could be very much improved. The second one has to do with labor market. In spite of all this very strong labor growth that we have witnessed in Spain over the last few years, unemployment rate remains relatively high, around 10%, and this very much reflects mismatches across regions that implies that certain active labor policies in Spain should be strengthened. The third challenge that I think is important to recall is the housing market. I mean, the very strong growth of the population and household formation in Spain. Think for a moment that in Spain, population, when we joined the monetary union in 1999 was around below 40 million people. We are now very close to 50 people. There are 10 million people, 20% of the, you cannot see that in other European countries. I think it's the only one that you can see such a strong population growth. And in particular, over the last few years, if you add this household formation domestically and labor dynamics, the foreign demand associated with the tourist boom, etc., this implies that the mismatch between supply and demand is growing, and this is exerting upward pressure on prices, on housing prices, but also might prove over time a major constraint to growth and development in the labor market. So this is something very much need to be addressed by all levels of administrations. And then finally, productivity and institutional quality. On productivity, we are on European average. On quality of the administrations and the governance of public, in general, of public administration, we are on the European average. If we want to really reach the highest standards, we need to move to the highest level, which are primarily in Europe, in Scandinavia. So I think we need still to work a lot. We should not be confident with being just an average country in Europe. I mean, that does require much more ambition. So these are the challenges. Now I'm going to move to the banking sector. And the first, this is the banking sector in Spain. I will start out with profitability. The first bar gives you an indication of the starting levels during the financial crisis, very low. This chart represents the profitability in terms of the return on assets. You can see that the average between 2014 and 2020 was 0.4%. This is the level in the subsequent year, and these are the current level, which are very close already to 1%. And just to give you a reference, they are above the level that we have in the booming period during the first decade of this century. The second stylized fact has to do with capital ratios. Here you can see we have used here the one that is comparable of the entire period, CET1 and CET1, and you can see that we are now at levels of 15%. I mean, Europe is at these levels also, but in the Spanish case, it's important to see that basically we are close to double, if not to double, the levels of capital of the banking system that we had basically 20 years ago. So it gives an idea of all the decisions we had made collectively in Europe in order to create buffers that could really absorb losses and credit cycles that could be problematic looking forward. But one of the elements in which Spain has made more progress, I would say, has to do with the deleveraging of the private sector, because this proved to be a major problem during the crisis. What you can see here is the level of debt relative to GDP of the Spanish households. You can see that at the start of monetary union at the start of the century, it was 43% of the GDP, nearly doubles in one decade to something which is 85% of GDP. And now, if you see all the decline and deleveraging process, we are at levels which are basically what we had 25 years ago. But the comparison with the European average, European Monetary Union average, is very helpful, because you can see how much progress has been made, and actually we are below the European average, and basically at the level of 25 years ago. I think it's very clearly reflected in this chart. The same story could be told about firms deleveraging, and even in a more acute manner. I mean, just to give you an indication, in the first decade of this century, the debt to GDP of the Spanish firm doubled from 53% to something that in 2010 was 120. Has been further declining from that, and this is a very clear illustration of the deleveraging. And here the comparison with Europe is even more clear. I mean, think for a moment that in 2010, the level of debt of Spanish firms was 45 percentage point higher in terms of GDP than the European average. Now we are basically the European average. This is very important, because what it reflects is that the growth of the Spanish economy over the last 15 years since the crisis has been primarily undertaken with own resources, with retained profits, and the reliance on debt has been far less than in the past, and allowing for this deleveraging. And this is also something that helps a lot now in terms of soundness of the Spanish economy. Now I'm going to move to your sector in Spain. And you can see here first, this slide probably is well known to you, because it's the groups, the cooperatives in Europe according to the levels of organizational models. The highly integrated groups, like the one which is here, the Cajamar group, the less integrated or intermediate integrated one, and finally the regulated IPS. Here are the European groups, and I will show up here where the Spanish groups are, the three Spanish groups are. And I would like to stress, because for us it's a strength to have a model, an organizational model that values very much risk sharing and integration in terms of taking advantage of synergies and trying to exploit some certain scale factors. Here you can see the sector is around 10% of the Spanish credit market. And here you have a detail of the four groups, how much they account for in terms of this 9%. And I mean, I also have a map here, as it was presented before, because I wanted now to stress a number of factors that for us are very important in terms of the role played by cooperatives. This is, remember that let's say the market share in terms of credit in Spain is around 10%. These are the Spanish provinces. And you can see where the cooperatives have a market share above or below this 10%, or even in the color, which is more intense, above 20%. I mean, these are areas, not only, but the areas which are not particularly populated. So cooperatives play in a number of areas in Spain a major role in, let's say, trying to avoid maybe a market failure and provide financial services and credit in areas which are not very much catered for by the traditional banking sector. But if we now, and here you see, I mean, with this, in some provinces, the market share is close to 1/3 of the entire market. But now I'm going to focus on SMEs and self-employed. And here the cooperatives in Spain, cooperative banks, move from 10% to a market share which is nearly 14%. And you can see here that the number of provinces actually the share is even closer or above half of the market. I mean, this is very remarkable. When we move to a sector, SMEs, self-employed, that a priori we may feel need particular support from the financial sector for a number of reasons. But if we actually focused in particular on self-employed workers, you will see that the market share is now close to 30%. And in a number of provinces, and again the colors reflect how they distributed in Spain, but you can see here actually that in a number of provinces, for instance, Almeria, just to take Almeria, which is there, the cooperative sector, cooperative banks amount to close to 60%, if not 60%, of the credit extended to self-employed. I mean, this is to us remarkable, and I think it's a value that needs to be stressed. And then now focus on sectors. I mean, you will not be surprised after previous presentations that the contribution to the agricultural, in Spanish with forestry and fishing, this is the general definition, is about 1/3 of the market share of the entire banking sector. And there are other sectors like wholesale and retail and manufacturing, which are even above the 10% for the entire economy. But if we focus on the activity for SMEs and self-employed and crossing this information of the size of the firms with sectors, you will see that in quite a number of sectors, they are nearly close to 15%, like wholesale and retail trade, manufacturing 15%, construction 12%. So as soon as we are really combining information sectors and type of industry by size, we are indicating how important the cooperatives are in supporting particular sectors. And now, just to finish, let's look at the self-employed. In the case of the self-employed workers, in agriculture, it's close to 50% of the entire credit extended by the banking sector to the economy, but in the case of manufacturing, it's about 20%. Or in the case of wholesale and retail trade, is above 1/3. I mean, this is really remarkable, I would say, given the original footprint of the cooperatives, and this is reflected actually in that they have been very dynamic actually in terms of the credit extended over the last decade or so. Here's the credit portfolio of cooperatives. I will skip this because I want to move here. Because this reflects, again, the credit distribution of cooperatives. The cooperatives are also strong in mortgages, and you can see that the market share is 6 percentage points above the average of the system for mortgages, are less specialized and well below, I would say, the rest of the system in consumption and credit to large corporations. That makes sense, I would say. But finally, where they are really showing a distinctive element is when we focus on SMEs, self-employed, with 10 percentage points above the average in the system. And here you have a distribution of that. And in terms of growth, I mean, because I was referring to the stocks in terms of market share, when we focus on the change in credit stock, on the dynamic of credit over the last, in this case, 8 years, you can see how dynamic cooperative credit has grown 32% in terms of the stock of credit in the balance sheet, while the rest of the system has been practically stagnant. When we focus now on SMEs and self-employed, that has been a sector after the crisis in Europe, not only in Spain, which has been not particularly dynamic, and also in deleveraging process, while the rest of the system has, the credit to SMEs and self-employed workers has declined by 20% compared to the existing stock in 2017. In the case of cooperatives, actually the figure is positive. And then when we look at, in particular, self-employed, and this is to me very, very telling, while in the entire banking system, the stock of credit extended to self-employed workers is 30% below that prevailing in 2017. In the case of cooperatives, bank cooperatives, we are talking about more than 10% above. This is a major difference that requires further reflection. And actually, we are reflecting and investigating the extent to which from here we can have, let's say, some, let's say, elements that could help our regulation in certain directions. I mean, someone could say, okay, but this is, okay, they have been very dynamic in credit, but what about non-performing loans? Well, the non-performing loans, you can see here, and here is this, again, a comparison over the last 8 years is significantly below the non-performing loans of the rest of the system. And when we look in particular to one sector, which is more risky, which is SMEs and self-employed, I mean, the distinction, the gap is even larger. In the case of the non-performing loans for cooperative, for SMEs and self-employed is 4.6. In the rest of the system is 6.2. And particularly for self-employed, I focus again on self-employed, you will see that the gap is even larger than between the system and the cooperatives. And profitability is as strong as the rest of the system, around 1% of the total assets. Solvency, higher. Leverage ratio, another way of looking at solvency, higher than the rest of the system. In terms of liquidity, this is the regulatory liquidity ratio above the average. And also, if we look at the loan-to-deposit ratio, much below the rest of the system. And also, when we look at the performance over time, I mean, this is really confirmed. So we are, I mean, as supervisory regulators, this is a sector we are particularly have a light into that because it's an impression that is contributing, as it has been shown here for Almeria and for Cooperativa, is contributing very much to the economy and to the economy thriving from financing, but at the same time is showing ratios from solvency, liquidity, and other factors that I have shown, which are very, very much reassuring for the supervisor and regulator. I mean, the strengths, what is behind? I would say, and I think it has been a business model that is very much established and proven. They have shown also that in situations of crisis, the risk-sharing mechanisms and the solidarity among them worked very well, and this is very reassuring also. All this ratio reflects a very prudent behavior in terms of solvency, and I would say that as I said, this contribution to potential financial exclusion is very much to be highlighted. The challenges, there are also challenges, and the challenges very much have to do with the scale, strategic implementation in terms of digitalization, compliance, I mean, in different respects, governance, and also I think that the credit investment in terms of environmental issues is also an issue. But at the same time that these, let's say, strengths and challenges are indicated, I would like to indicate that to us as supervisors and regulators, I mean, these challenges are being addressed. And in the case of the sector, one way of, or the most clear way of addressing the problems stemming from scale is by, let's say, consolidating or working together in different models that have been mentioned before in order to exploit synergies and ways of, let's say, exploiting the benefits or collaborating and working together. And in this chart, what you can see is an illustration of the consolidation of the sector in Spain over the last 15, 20 years. And I think that this reflects that, let's say, 20 years ago, we have a much more dispersed system, and now we have a system that shows, in terms of integration and risk-sharing, elements of strength that we very much value. And finally, we can help. We can help at the national level, at the European level, even at the global level. I'm thinking of the Basel Committee, for instance, or the Financial Stability Board, we are all working on. And I think that the key words are regulatory simplification and proportionality. These are elements that need to be introduced with readjustment in our regulatory framework. We are working on that. Not only the Governing Council of the ECB, but I have been very much involved personally on these issues. And I think that, I mean, the paper or the position paper by the ECB that was presented last week, but also the contribution we are making to other groups in the terms of European Banking Authority, the European Commission, the European Resolution Board, the Financial Stability Board, the Basel Committee, all these fora are now addressing these issues, and I think they are doing so with ambition and with vision. Ambition and vision. And these two elements need to factor in very much something which is very important to you, which I think is simplification and proportionality. You need to understand that we came from a very acute financial crisis 15 years ago, which involved public money, macroeconomic disturbances. I mean, the regulatory framework need to be strengthened. We are benefiting. And I come back to the origin of my presentation, one of the reasons of the resilience of the world and the European economy has to do precisely with that the financial system, the banks, you, are really contributing to this resilience, while in the past, and not you, but others maybe, really provided weaknesses that amplified the crisis of the shocks. Now this is not only the case. We need to preserve the strength of the banking sector in Europe. We need to do it, but at the same time, I think we need to rethink in which areas we really need to simplify to reduce density and complexity that might be justified as a reaction of the previous crisis, but now requires adjustment. This is where we are. And I can tell you that we are very serious in these initiatives, and you will see probably during next year already tangible outcomes. In the Spanish case, I mean, because I think this simplification starts from home. I mean, we have, in the Bank of Spain, we have gone internally to a major exercise to see how much we can reduce in terms of reporting to the banking institutions. Now, we have in the State Council a piece of legislation, I mean, a guideline of the Bank of Spain, circular, which will reduce 30% of the reporting to the institution stemming from us with a proportionality element involved. And probably in the course of next year, we will be able to cut further this regulation by another 15%. I think there is room for doing that at the national level, at the European, at the global level. Thank you very much, and I think I am available to your questions if you feel that I can address your questions.